for a variety of reasons. For many women, it's a very hard day or week or month. For some, it's due to the loss of their own mother, whether it's been many years or a short time, and you've lost your mom, this conversation is for you. So some of you will be here live. Whether you are or you're listening to the replay, we want to hear from you. Share your questions, comments, experiences in the comments, and we will take some questions that were submitted in advance at the end. So, and also share this with a woman in your life who needs it. Hope. Oh my goodness. So if you don't know Hope Edelman, you really need to. She's the author of 8 nonfiction books. Motherless Daughters hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, 30 years ago, and people are still talking about it. It's incredible. You've sold over 1 million copies in 17 countries. Your newest book, or newer book, is called The AfterGrief, Finding Your Way Along the Long Arc of Loss. But the books are, sorry, I have to get all this out because it's just so good. The books are like the tip of the iceberg, really. Like, you've built your entire work life around this. I'm sure, like your life, hosting retreats and support groups and resources on motherlessdaughters.com. Hope, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's a pleasure.
So I know I told you this already, but I want my listeners and viewers to know this conversation is 30 years in the making. So I'm going to take you back to this girl from Boston driving out to California to live on her own, in my mid-20s. And somebody, I cannot credit the person, I don't know, but they gave me the book, Motherless Daughters. And it changed my life. And I know you've been hearing that for 30 years. You must get like, yeah, I know. But it changed my life. And I sent it to my sisters. I have 4 sisters who also, my mom passed when I was 3. I was the youngest of 11 children.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And so, and my dad got remarried less than a year later to a former nun. We could do a whole episode on that. We won't. But I also saw you speak at, I think at the time it was UCLA Extension. I thought it was like one of those like night with the author type things. Or
What
maybe
year
it was
would it-
somewhere else. Like
Give me a year.
97 maybe.
Okay, 97, I had just moved to Los Angeles, so that's possible.
Yeah, like maybe in that area. So anyway, I would share the book with any woman who I met like in that time and even after. And so if we could go down memory lane just a little bit before we get into today, your origin story, like take me back to the 90s or even before that, like where did this book come from in you?
This book came from a need to find this book on the shelf and not being able to. I was 17 when my mom died of breast cancer, and I was a reader from a very early age. So I went to the library looking for a book about mother loss or girls who lose mothers, and there weren't any. There were books on mother loss, but they were all for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, when it's statistically much more probable that your mom will die. And I went to college the next year and looked in the college libraries, looked in bookstores. I kept checking in here and there wherever I lived. So I moved around a lot, libraries, bookstores, never found this book. And then in my late 20s, I was in a graduate program in writing, and my really wonderful professors suggested I write it myself. So I did, with the help of 2 mentors at the University of Iowa, and started interviewing women, and that's how Motherless Daughters came about. Yes, it's been in print for 32 years. That's a number so big I can't believe it can even come out of my mouth, because it doesn't feel like that long ago, but it's now in its 3rd edition, so keep updating it to bring new research in and new lines of thought, because a lot has changed in the grief world and the way we think about early parent loss, just in the past 10 years even.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into all that. I just remember feeling like I had been speaking, and my mother died of breast cancer as well. And I remember thinking like, it felt like I was speaking a foreign language that no one else understood.
Right.
Right. And like you try try to make jokes. You try to like, I know that sounds really weird, but like try to lighten the mood about my dead mom, you know, and try to like be relatable and you know all the Disney movies that would come out and the mom was deceased and it was like, yeah, isn't that the way it is, you know?
Every Disney
um
movie, Jackie. Pretty much
right.
every Disney movie, right?
Disney's the only one who understood me, I feel like, in some ways, you know. So what was the response like then, and then how has the response changed over the
Right.
years?
Such a good question. Well, let's dial back to 1994. We didn't
Yeah.
have the internet. So
Mm.
you couldn't just
Thank
like go
God.
to the author's website and hit the contact button and send an email.
Right.
And there was no social media, obviously, because there was no internet. So the only way that readers could reach me was by writing a letter to the publisher. And I got sacks of handwritten letters from women who'd read the book, who felt like finally there are others out there who understand what my, childhood and adult life have been like. And they felt like they had permission to share their story, but they still didn't know anyone in the real world that they could share it with. So they wrote it to me
Mm-hmm.
and dropped it in the mail. And I'd sit in my living room with hundreds of letters. I read every single one of them.
You
I
did?
did my best to respond, but after a certain point, it became impossible. But that's how the book Letters from Motherless Daughters, which was the follow-up, came
Yes.
to be,
Yes.
from those letters, because I thought these are extraordinary stories of resilience and survival, and I'm the only one who gets to read them. That doesn't seem right. So
Mm.
that was the second book.
Yeah,
And
I have that.
so that was the response back then. But I want to even go a little bit further back to, it would have been in 1992, the summer of 1992, or 1991. That summer is when I started working on the book. And my professor had said, well, maybe, just go out and interview people, start collecting stories. This was her orientation. It was very good advice. I had been trained as a journalist and in anthropology, so I was an interviewer. And I, again, pre-internet, I was in Evanston, Illinois for the summer, teaching at Northwestern. And I remember those pieces of paper with the pull tabs at the bottom?
Oh yeah, when somebody's looking for someone.
And you'd have your phone number on each of the tabs. I know we're dating
Yes.
ourselves, but we're grown
Yeah.
ass women, and so are your listeners. They probably remember this
Thank
too. It
you.
feels like a long time ago, but this is how we used to find people if you were renting a house or selling a bicycle or
Yes.
interviewing someone for a book. So
Interesting.
I made two of these, flyers and, with little pull tabs at the bottom with my phone number on them. And I put one up at a cafe. For anyone who knows Evanston, Illinois, it was Cafe Express on Dempster, and the Platypus Bookstore, which was a woman's bookstore, also on Dempster, I believe,
Cool.
maybe Main Street, one or the other. And I put them up. And about a day or two later, maybe just a day, I was so intrigued. I thought, I wonder if anyone has pulled those tabs. I
Mm.
need to go see. I just like wanted to see that there was one person out there, who wanted to be interviewed for this book. And I went back, I guess it was like a day and a half later, and all the tabs had been pulled, all of them. So
Wow.
people were pulling them for their sisters, for their cousins, for their best friends, for themselves. And then
Yeah.
the phone calls started coming in, and we still had
Amazing.
answering machines back then. So my tapes would fill up because women would start telling their stories on the answering machine tape. Like they were so eager to have someone was saying, yes, I want to hear this, because they've been holding the story in for so long.
Yeah.
And so that's what it was like at the beginning. How's it different now? Well, now there's the internet. There's more
Mm-hmm.
books. There's many therapists and coaches and Instagram accounts that specialize in mother loss. But there still isn't anyone who has 32 years of experience working with these women. So I do have a company
Absolutely.
that offers support groups and online support groups and 4-day
Mm-hmm.
retreats and other forms of services to build community and help women find each other and share their stories, because I've trained in narrative therapy and I really believe that telling our stories, and especially doing it in a very structured, guided way,
Yeah.
can be a very effective form of healing.
Amazing. And you also partner with a therapist at your retreats and um, right. So, I mean, I was looking at the work. I'm like, how do I sign up? I got to get in there.
You
And
do.
it's all right there on your website. I have to ask you, is there anything you wrote back then that you were like, oh, I wouldn't write that today?
Such a good question because I'm in conversations about possibly updating Motherless Daughters again. So, is there anything back then that I wouldn't write today? Um, I would take the phrase committed suicide out of the book. We don't use that phrase anymore
Mm,
in the bereavement
hmm.
world because that sounds like a crime. I would say died by suicide
Yeah.
or took her own life. That's the languaging that we tend to use today, or suicided. So I would take that out. I have a much wider appreciation for the effects of complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I
Mm,
think I was looking at the behaviors that are very common among motherless daughters and did not have a framework to place it in, which is that many of them are survivors of complex PTSD, which is the result of being exposed to stressful experiences over a long time, especially in those whose mothers were sick, but also PTSD in those who lost their mothers very suddenly. I think I would add more information about how grief is culturally relative rather than emphasizing all the similarities that daughters have, which are real. I
mm.
would give equal weight to how race, religion, sexual orientation, and geography can play a factor in how a family responds and and the messages that a daughter gets about grief. All of this is now central
Right.
into my retreats and to my workshops and to my support groups. But um, I'd like to add more of that in the book.
Absolutely. Do you think how or how as a country, I'll just focus on the US for a minute, how have we sort of evolved in how we deal with grief over those 30 years?
Great question. Well, I'm going to go back 40 years to when my mom died in
Okay.
1981 when there was no grief support
Yeah.
whatsoever. No family grief centers. I think the Dougie Center was just starting in Portland around
Mm.
that time, but it was very local. That's sort of the gold standard for family grief centers in the US. There wasn't even hospice in my community yet. So the messages of that time were all about you need to get over it, you need to get past it, you
Mm.
need to move on.
Hmm.
It was like this very sort of like linear, progressive. There are 5 stages of grief, and we need to sort of like,
Right.
nudge you along on your way to
Which
acceptance.
stage are you at? Let me check my
Right,
watch, you know?
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, now we know that grief is much more cyclical, and that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross never intended for people to go through those stages in a one unidirectional sequence, but these were the
Right.
messages of the time. So that's how I thought grief should look. Fortunately, it's such a different landscape now, and COVID has been a big game changer. And
Interesting.
social media too, for helping people share their stories. And um, so we are a much more grief literate society now than we were. There's a
Mm-hmm.
greater understanding that grief's a lifelong process. There's
Mm-hmm.
more appreciation for the individuality of it, that my grief won't look like yours, and yours won't look like your siblings, and your siblings won't look like anyone else's, even if you lost the same mother.
Right.
So we're much better at understanding that now and talking about it. There are a number of celebrities who've come out and talked about losing their moms or losing a
Mm.
parent, and that's made a difference because they are role models. My friends in the UK, it's very interesting. The UK is really even further ahead, I think, than the US in some areas in
Really?
offering grief support to families, especially children who've lost a parent. And my
Mm.
friends in the UK said there was a big shift in their culture when Prince William and Prince Harry went public talking about their grief for their mom years later and how her death had affected them. And that gave like a whole culture permission to talk
Yeah.
about it in a way that, I'm not sure was anticipated, but happened in that way. So
Yeah. And yeah,
we're in a
they're a great
different place
example
now.
of two siblings who experienced the same mother loss and who went in very different directions, maybe led by their grief, you know?
And by the age they were at time of loss. How old were they? Were they like 14 and 12 maybe?
No,
Those are different
were they
developmental
that old?
periods.
Yeah.
15 and some, they were right around there. They were both in early adolescence, as I recall,
Mm,
but they were not exactly at the same, developmental plateau. And that matters a
right.
lot. How old you were when your mom died. I mean, Jackie, you were 3. Do you have
Yeah.
any memories of your mom?
No. And
Yeah,
it took me many years to be able to say that without
yeah,
feeling guilty, you know?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's a very specific and special category of mother loss. I work with
mm,
women who were, 6 or 5 and under and don't have any conscious memories of their moms. That's an additional kind of sadness to carry. That
yeah,
I knew her, but it was so brief that I can't remember her. And that's no fault of the child's. I mean,
of
most of
course.
us can't remember being 2 or 3 years old. I mean,
Right.
by the time there is a phenomenon called childhood amnesia, by the time we are 5 years old, we've lost most of the memories that we had at 3 of our earlier years. And then
Right.
by 7, what we've got by 7, we generally keep for life, unless we've trauma blocked it. And some women do because they've had traumatic experiences in childhood. But yeah, developmentally, the developmental period or phase that you're in when your mom dies matters so much. And of course,
Mm,
how she died matters, your birth order in the family. There are so many
right.
factors
Right.
that make two siblings who lose the same mother have very different experiences.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone's written about being, 11 kids. So that, I mean, that was its own, and Irish Catholic Boston, it was like, pay no attention to the empty seat at the table, and it was a sign of the times, and it was, I
Yeah.
don't blame anyone for that. And a quick story that I'm told, because I don't remember this, that I would walk around the room breaking off pieces of saltine crackers and trying to support all of the adults who are upset. And that was my way, which explains a lot about who I am today, trying to like help everybody, fix everybody with food. But even back then, it was like I wanted to support them because I think I didn't understand.
Right. Well, at 3 years old, you wouldn't really have even
Yeah,
understood what death
you don't
means.
understand finality. Yeah.
You don't even start really developing that until about the age of 5 or 6, a real understanding. Rosie
Hmm.
O'Donnell has talked about coming from
Yes.
a large Irish Catholic family, and she was, I think, about 10, right around 9, 10, 11 when her mom died. She's been an incredible advocate for this work. She's talked about it and
Yeah,
really
she's
helped
amazing. I
spread
actually
the
had a
word.
conversation. I consulted on one of her podcasts and we had this conversation, which was the best because for so many decades I was like, I got to talk to her someday about this. So
Yeah,
yeah,
she's
that was
been
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah,
She's
it was
amazing
cool.
as a person and as a motherless daughters advocate.
Absolutely. And so, there's that balance between moving forward and also being able to talk about your mom and talk about your loss. And there are a lot of people who, as you said, are like, get over it. Is that where your book and the whole term after grief comes from?
The after grief comes from the acknowledgement that grief is a lifelong process, that it will keep showing up in our lives in different ways over and over again. I mean, I'm going to guess if you have children that when your children turned 3, you might have looked at them and thought,
Mm,
how on earth did I ever survive the loss of my mom? Now, that would have been 20 or 30 years later. Who would expect that to show up again? But that's such a predictable milestone for
hmm.
motherless daughters to reach and experience a resurgence of grief. So the after grief talks about how when someone dies, we are, maybe for 6 months to 2 years in this acute phase of grief where our brain doesn't understand that they're no longer here and our bodies are still expecting them to be near. And we're maybe coping with shock and numbness and disbelief and all the big feelings. And then those start to abate and we settle into a different kind of long-term grief experience, and that's what I
Mm,
call the after grief. And
okay.
it has a rhythm and patterns of its own and those predictable points, especially if the loss occurred when you were young, where it will show up again in ways that are both expected and unexpected for your whole life.
Mm. Interesting. I remember when my kids were little, just looking at them and going, I can't imagine you. Like, I am the end all be all for you, and I can't imagine that you wouldn't remember me, you know? And that was one thing. And the other thing that I got to do was when my youngest, well, not, I had two biological boys and then we adopted after this. But when I had the first two boys, um, at 5 months and 22 months, I found out I had the BRCA gene that my mom had. And so, that led to the breast cancer and the family and all the whole stuff, the whole thing. And so I had prophylactic surgeries to prevent my kids from having the same experience I had, which did
Wow.
so much for my grief and so much for my, I felt like I did what my mom couldn't do
Yeah.
because they didn't know back in 1974 about BRCA genes and genetic mutations and all of that, and so it was very healing for me. And so you have two daughters. I mean, you're the expert here, but how did your grief, your personal grief, come up and in expected and unexpected ways when you had your daughters?
Well, first, I thought I have done so much work around mother loss. Motherless Daughters had been out for like a whopping 3 years, maybe 4 years when my first was born.
Mm.
And I thought, I'm prepared for this. I'm ready. I know what to expect. I know I'm going to miss my mom. I know I'm going to miss her for these reasons. And, I had those predictable moments in my pregnancy when the doctor asked questions that I couldn't answer, and I had to say, I don't know, and this is why.
Mm.
When I wanted to know what her pregnancies had been like, and I didn't have access to that information. So there were moments of, little pings of grief throughout the pregnancy. But I was completely unprepared for what it would feel like to bring my daughter home and just feel so lost, so bereft. All the friends in my pregnancy group had moms who came in for the postpartum period and showed them what to do and gave them reassurance and helped them build confidence. And my mother-in-law came, which was wonderful, but she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't my mom.
Yeah.
She was very much there to help with the baby, and she did, and I really appreciated it. But she couldn't give me the kind of inner confidence or reassurance that I needed. And it was a difficult birth with a long recovery. So,
Mm.
but I would look at my daughter and think, my God, you're never going to know your grandmother. Your grandmother's never going to know you. It's like I'm the one here now who represents both of us. And it was deep and powerful and really sad in a way I'd never expected. And so in the after grief, I call those moments or moments like that new old grief, because it's
Mm.
an old grief showing up in a new way. There's new grief when someone dies. There's old grief that comes around for birthdays and holidays and anniversaries. It gets reactivated, or a song comes on the radio that reminds you of your mom and you're crying in the car. To me, that's old grief. But new old grief is when you step into a new phase of your life or have an experience like graduate or get married or become a mother or turn your mother's age at time of death. That's probably the biggest
Yes.
one of
That
all.
was my next question. Yep.
That's the biggest one of all, where you're going to feel grief for your loss, but also you might feel grief for your mom. And
Mm.
and that's a whole new experience, right? So here I am now, I'm holding this newborn. I'm grieving for myself because I don't have a mom there to support or help me or advise me. I'm grieving for
Mm-hmm.
my daughter because she doesn't have a maternal grandmother. I'm grieving for my mother who didn't have the opportunity to meet her first grandchild. That's a heck of a lot to be dealing with in a postpartum period. But
Absolutely.
and a lot of motherless daughters postpartum are diagnosed with postpartum depression when actually what they're experiencing is grief. Yeah,
Oh,
because it
that's
looks so
so
similar.
interesting.
So if you're feeling what's being labeled as depressed after
Mm.
in the postpartum period, it might be PPD, but it also might be a resurgence of grief. So you want to be in the care of someone who can help you sort that out because the treatments are different.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Yeah, because it could look the same. Um, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. That deadline, right? That I grew up thinking 39 was it, right? There was my 40s weren't even on the radar. It was
Right.
just this assumption, and it wasn't this big dramatic assumption like, "Oh, I'm going to die at 39." It was just this knowledge that I thought. I'm 55 now, by the way, so it's been a minute. Um, I mean, I created this like the whole podcast and brand for women over 40 because I was like, I can't believe I'm here. Like, let's
Right?
party. Yeah. So do
Yep.
you see that a lot with your work with women who feel like there's an end date?
100%. I'm going to say probably 99% of the women that I work with.
Mm,
Um, and that 1% typically are women whose moms died of a cause that is impossible for them to replicate or so statistically improbable, like some kind of really unusual accident. But I see it most in the women whose moms died from a disease that could be heritable, like a form of cancer or heart
right.
disease or an autoimmune disease that maybe could run in a family. Yes. Oh my gosh. It's such a significant moment that we have a name for it at Motherless Daughters. We call it crossing the silent threshold. And
Mm,
we co-created a self-styled ritual that women can do to mark the occasion because for us internally, it's so profound and the society just doesn't acknowledge it as a threshold. And, hopefully most of us are going to live longer than our moms, right?
right.
If we have a long, full life. But our peers are going to do that in their 70s or 80s or even their 90s. We're doing it in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s. My mom was 42 when she died. She was
Wow.
41 when she was diagnosed, 42 when she died.
Wow.
And 41 was a very anxious year. I did, made sure I got my mammograms, I got other ultrasounds, I was making sure that I could, if I were diagnosed at the same age, it would be much earlier. I think I started
Right.
really religiously doing it, making sure, even though I'd been getting them regularly at 39, 40, 41.
Hmm.
So 41 was strange and anxious, oh, it's coming, it's right there. It's 8 months away, it's 6 months away, it's 4 weeks away. And then I turned 42. And that was so strange. I was like,
Mm,
wait a second, my mom's not older than me anymore. How's that possible?
yeah.
And that was a weird year. But I will tell you that 43 was the funkiest one of all because,
Really?
yes, because suddenly I'm like, I'm older than my mom. Like, that's not
Yeah.
supposed to
What
happen.
do I do?
What universe? Where do I place that?
Yeah.
Um, and she wasn't a role model for me for aging anymore. And I felt like, it's an uncharted territory ahead of me now. I mean, even if I wasn't following her trajectory, which I wasn't, I married later, I had children later, I lived in a completely different part of the country. But there was still some model there for me to compare myself to, some kind of
Mm,
measuring stick. And now it wasn't there anymore. Now she's younger than me. And the older I got, the younger she became. But the big event for me was realizing when I turned 42 how young my mom had been. Did you feel that at 39? I thought,
yes. Because,
wow, this is,
when you're young, it seems much older and people would be surprised by it, but it's like, okay, but when you get there, you're like, that was so young. And so you mentioned grieving for your mom.
right,
So,
because when I was 17, I was like, oh, 42 is old, right? It felt
yeah.
really old. It
Yeah,
felt
yeah,
like
yeah.
she went to college, she got married, she had children, she did all these things
She
that
had a whole
seemed
life.
so
Mhm.
distant and far away. She had a full life. And like this is what I told myself. I was a kid. What did I know?
Yeah.
And then, I got to be 41, 42, and I was so young. And my friends, my peer
Yeah.
group, they were still having babies and, getting certified to teach yoga and traveling around the world. And it occurred to me, my mom only got half a life.
Yeah.
And I was so sad for her.
Yeah, she missed out. It's just there's a shift there, right?
It
From
was
me
because
feeling my grief.
I had been the daughter who lost her mother for so many
Yeah.
years. And now I was standing there side by side with the woman who lost half her life. And that was really intense. And I had another grief response that I was completely not expecting.
Wow.
the year she would have turned 84, because I thought, this is twice as old as, she's
Yeah.
been gone as long as she was here. These are the 42 years that she should have had and didn't get. And that's what we call
Yeah.
grief math in the bereavement world. It's always background in the background operating system. Even when
Yes.
you're not like consciously calculating it, you'll sit down and you'll realize, oh boy, that's what was going on. My
Yes.
mind must have been making those calculations in the background software all this time.
Yeah, I remember that calculation. And then I remember just, a year and a half ago, it was 50 years since she had died. And I'm like, how is that possible? But I want to talk for a second about, it's so easy for us. I mean, our moms were ripped away at very like unexpected ages. There are women who are our age or even older who are losing their moms who did have a full life. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes they're disregarded because it's like, oh, how old was your mom? Like, do you ever notice that people are like, how
Oh,
old was
sure.
she? Oh, that's appropriate. Like, and we decide if somebody's grief is like valid. And
Right.
so I'm
In the
sure you work with
hierarchy.
those women. Yeah.
I
Um,
do. And we have a call on Thursday evenings, actually, a support group called Just for Women Who Lost Moms in the Past 2 years. And some of
mm,
them had moms who died in their early 90s.
wow.
So here's what I find. It doesn't work that well to mix those women with the ones who were 3
Okay.
when their moms died. Yes, they both lost their mothers. Yes, they both grieve the absence of their mothers. But that woman who was 3 has grieved it her whole life. And the woman whose mom was 90 is in active grief right now. So, and then they can't help but compare and contrast. Well, my gosh, I have no right to feel sad about my mom. She lived to 92 and you were 3 years old when your mom died. And the woman who was 3 will look at that woman and say, what is she doing here? She had her mom her whole life through all her milestones. That said, we say we don't compare. There's no competition in grief, as
Right.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used to say, and as Megan Devine, author of It's Okay That You're Not Okay, says, there's no grief Olympics. We don't need to do
Hmm.
that. Because there's no better or worse, easier or harder. It's just
Right.
different kinds of hard. I mean, imagine being 64 years old and your mom is 90 and she's been in your life every day for 64 years. You have no idea how to be a person in this world
Yeah.
without your mom there as a touch point. And suddenly there you are at 64 having to figure out how to do this without her.
Yeah.
That's a real challenge for these women.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate that and I can hold space for that without comparing. Um, it's a very different experience, but their mom also may have played so many roles in their life. She may be a grandmother to their children. She may be a mother-in-law to their spouse. She's their confidant. Maybe they were caregivers for her, and that's been their job for the past few years and their purpose.
Right.
So there's so many different reasons why losing a mom later in life is hard too.
Yeah. And let's also call out the fact that some moms, mother daughter relationships aren't the strongest and are
Yes.
very complicated. And
Yeah.
so it's like, oh, but you weren't even close with your mom. Well, that's sometimes, I don't want to say harder because we're not comparing, but like that can be very challenging.
Yes, it can. And I'm seeing now, as everyone is, an upswing in family estrangements and adult children, um,
Mm,
choosing not to have relationships with their mothers and saying, well, when she dies, I'm going to be fine. And I'm sitting here thinking, maybe, but I see a lot of women who were estranged from their moms who aren't quite fine when their
yeah.
mom dies. Um, it's nuanced and complicated often and very layered, not so black and white.
Yeah.
But yes, estrangement, or to be separated from your mom or not have a relationship with her due to mental illness
Mm,
or addiction or incarceration or abandonment. There are many ways to lose a mom. There are many ways to not be mothered. And yes, thank you for opening space for this part of the conversation because it's important. And even if your mother's living and she's not available to you for those reasons, Mother's Day can be a hard day for you too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about Mother's Day. So, what do you see happening? Because I think someone listening who, no matter when they lost their mom or if they physically lost their mom, might be having some of these complicated feelings around Mother's Day. What do you
Yeah.
see coming up in women these days?
I see a feeling of being lonely and misunderstood.
Mm,
They want a space where they can celebrate or honor their mothers, but the culture doesn't give them one. You can't take her out to brunch. You could buy her a card, and some women do, and fill it out and save them from year to year, letting her know what's happened in the past year. But
hmm,
you can't send her flowers. You could bring them to her grave, which some women do. But there's a lack of a structure for how to spend the day in a way that makes her a presence rather than an absence. Now, for those women who are mothers, the day becomes about them. But I also work
hmm.
with women for whom, at a certain point, the kids grow up, they move on, they're in other cities or countries. You don't see them on Mother's Day. Maybe
Right.
you get a text or a phone call or a FaceTime, but
Yeah.
the day is not all about you anymore, and they don't know where to put themselves or what to do on that day. So on that weekend, we offer a free call on Saturday. Motherless Daughters does. I do it with 4 co-hosts: Claire Bidwell Smith, Angela Schellenberg, Ace Easter, Jerry Okamoto Tanaka. The 5 of us are like a dream team. We've done it several years in a
Wow.
row. And we have a program, just 60 minutes, completely free online. Women from all over the world come. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women on the Zoom screen to come together and say, I loved my mom. I still love my mom. She matters still. And I
Mm,
want to honor her on this weekend. We do a blessing, we do a toast, we do what we
mm,
call a circle of remembrance. We say our names and our mother's names out loud. We carve a space for her and for our relationship on this weekend. And it's a really profound hour. And we do it the day before Mother's Day only because so many women on Mother's Day need to be with their children or their
right.
mothers-in-law and or their stepmothers. And so we give them space that can be just an hour for them to be with the memory of their moms. And then on Mother's Day itself, I mean, an unlimited number of individual choices you can make that help you feel like your mom is part of that day, whatever it is.
Mm,
I've been asked what are some really free and easy ones. You can buy or pick her favorite flowers and put them in a
hmm.
vase in a special place. You can take a photo of her and put it in a high traffic area of your house. And when you walk by several times a day, just reach out and touch the frame with your fingertip for that moment of connection, like, hi, mom, I see you. And
Mm,
also, what we say, you tell stories about her for sure. Share them with the younger generation, your children, your nieces, your nephews,
absolutely.
the cousins. Let them know who she was and that she was here and left a mark. And the saying we have at Motherless Daughters is the best way to honor your mother is to take good care of her daughter. So do something
Hmm.
nice for yourself on that day that you think she would appreciate. So maybe something that she would have suggested that you do or would have liked for you to do, whether it's, taking a walk, a hike in the woods, or getting a massage, or, doing your own nails, or cooking dinner for your neighbors, whatever it is that you think,
Yeah.
well, that's not really for you, I guess, unless you really enjoy cooking, which I do. So
Right.
that's why I thought of, if I could
Yes.
spend the evening cooking, that's nice for me, and then I can't eat
Right.
it all, so I give it to the neighbors.
Best of both worlds, I guess. Good for the neighbors, that's for sure. So
It's a win-win.
what's that?
Win-win.
Absolutely. So I mentioned that my third son is adopted and his biological mother died. And so I have learned a lot about my own grief and healing through supporting him all these years and talking about her and making sure that it's never taboo. You're never hurting my feelings. I mean, that's, one of the things I think I didn't talk about my mom or ask about her so much growing up because I felt guilty, that I didn't want to say anything in front. As I said, my father was remarried. She adopted all of us. And so I wanted to make sure that I didn't offend her or hurt her feelings.
Right.
And so it's really interesting. My son likes to we go to the garden store and buy a plant, and we have this little grief garden in our backyard that we plant things and we paint rocks and we put people's names on them when they pass. And anyway, I think not only is that healing for him, but it's very healing for me to be able to all that unexpressed grief growing up to be able to express it as an adult is amazing.
Yeah. So your stepmother did not do those things for you in honor or memory of your biological mother?
No, she had now had 11 kids. She married a man with 11 kids. So she just keeping us alive was her
Yeah.
yeah.
And
And
fed.
that relationship was complicated. That's a whole other episode as well. So
I'm sure
um
it's, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
so there
sure. So
wasn't there
stepmothers,
wasn't yeah. She did the best she could, but acknowledging the pain was not part of it.
and it wasn't part of that era
Correct.
either. What year did your mom die? It was the 70s?
74, yeah. And he
Yeah.
was remarried in 75. And so like I
Yeah.
said, I held grudges. I no longer hold grudges, but I think my father was just trying to stay alive and raise they ended up having two more kids together, so raising 13 kids and you know it's its own thing, but
Exactly.
um
But what you're doing for your son honors that there was a biological mother who carried him and birthed
yes,
him. And when on the rare occasion that I get to work with stepmothers, which isn't that often, I talk about how important it is to acknowledge that there was a mother here before you came into the
yes,
family. The children remember her, they're part of her, they still love her, they need permission to talk about her and express that. Um, if you're coming in right after the loss, then you're coming into a family where the children are in active grief.
hmm
It's complicated and difficult for stepmothers, but pretending, oh, they're okay because they're not talking about it is really not the way we want this to go.
right,
Because that means
absolutely,
those kids have just suppressed it and have learned I can't talk about it. It's not safe. It will upset the adults around me, and I need them to be not upset so I can feel safe.
absolutely. There's a little timely thing that was happening over on Threads. I don't know if you heard of it. You know the actor Patton Oswald.
Yeah,
um
I do.
he
He's
he
raising his
his
daughter
wife.
after his wife died. Hmm.
Right, and he got remarried, and so he
Hmm.
acknowledged his wife. It had been 10 years since she passed, and so he acknowledged it on Threads and said, it's been 10 years. He may have said I think he called her babe, referred to her as babe or something. And I'm telling you, the internet knows how we should grieve much more than we do, apparently, because they went after him like, some said, oh, your wife must be this, his current wife must be so understanding, you're very lucky. And then others were like, that's so disrespectful and da 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 da. And I just thought, what a lovely thing, number one, that his wife must be a good person, but she married someone who had a daughter and a deceased wife. Like, it wasn't a secret. He didn't pull it out later and surprise her with it. Like, I think there's a responsibility that some people are aware of when you enter into that sort of life, right? And so I didn't know if you had seen that and what your thoughts were.
Yes, I have seen that on multiple occasions, and I'm really sad to say, but I don't hear a lot of relationships between motherless daughters and stepmothers that are close and warm and
Mm,
loving and enduring. I wish I did. There are some out there. I do, occasionally meet women who say, I had an amazing, wonderful stepmother, but there are more for whom the relationship is fraught, um,
mm,
especially if the father has remarried very early, and especially if she either had children of her own who came into the household or birthed new children with their father, the half siblings. They often felt like they're a remnant of a family that no longer exists and they don't really belong in the new one. And sometimes they're made to feel that way. It's a very complicated and very individual experience. But I hope as we become and continue to become a more grief literate society, that there will be more education and resources for stepmothers who come into these families, because those children have needs. And if you're coming in the role of the father's partner, then there is a responsibility to attend to those children's needs, and not to ignore them. Unfortunately, in the past, they very often went ignored.
Yeah.
Not always, but
Yeah.
more
But
often than not.
probably more often than not. Yeah. What do you think your mom would say? I mean, I know you can't know for sure, but what do you think your mom would say about this incredible 30 plus years of work that you've done?
Um, well, it wouldn't exist if she were here to say something, right? I
True.
mean, she'd say, "Too bad I had to die for this to happen." That's our dark humor, right? No,
Yes.
that's a really good question, and it brings up a point that I think is a salient one for this conversation, which is people often say to me, "Well, what do your mom would think this, or what do you think your mom would say?" And I think, well, all I have to draw from is who my mom was at 42,
Yeah.
and the way that I perceived her as a 17-year-old. And that was a very limited perception. And it also was an immature woman who, not that she was immature for 42, but that's all the time she had.
Yeah.
So when I think about what my mom would say to me today, I think, well, what would the 42-year-old woman say to me through the lens of the 17-year-old daughter? And then I also think, what would the 86-year-old, no, oh gosh, no, she'd be 88. What would the 88-year-old woman say to the adult daughter, now that the 88-year-old woman has been exposed to all of the social, economic, political, spiritual changes of the past 40 years?
Right.
46 years, what would she say? And that's a big question mark. I can create the ideal mother in my mind who would be always loving and supportive. So I don't know what my mom would say. I can guess, I can imagine, but I can't ever know with certainty. She's been gone for too long, and too much has changed in the meantime.
Absolutely. And I like that you acknowledge too that, I used to joke that my mom was a cowboy because, like that little boy whose dad, took off and his mom was like, your dad was a cowboy and he had to go. Like we create these, obviously, like create these stories about them, like as if my mom were this perfect human being who birthed 11 children and probably was patient all the time. And, she was a great cook and but she was a human being and she had 11 kids. And I'm sure that she was flawed just like the rest of us. And so as a 55-year-old, I can actually look at that and acknowledge it and be grateful that she was a flawed human being, that I don't have to hold her to some pedestal that maybe I held her to when I was younger.
Right. Well, our mothers become much more complex and nuanced and human as we age ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing when we allow that to happen, because it gives us permission to be complex and nuanced and human as well.
Exactly. Exactly. So, okay, we're going to get into the questions. I received a few questions in advance when I had promoted on social media. But before I ask or share those, what is a question you wish somebody would ask you that no one does? Is there one?
I've been asked so many questions over 32 years. Let me think. Um,
Do you ever feel like, oh, they're missing the ball? Like you should be asking me this.
I think you should be asking me about my mother's life and not just her death, because she was more than a mother who died. She was a woman who lived for 42 years, and she had all kinds of hobbies and thoughts and hopes and dreams. So I really like sharing stories about who my mother was before she got sick. So I'd say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
ask me about who my mother was before she got sick. And not through the eyes of a 17-year-old, but just, like objectively and factual. She had a really interesting life before she became a mom and after. And I like talking about that too, not just about how she died and what happened next.
Yeah, that's amazing because I think that's a great tip for all of us when we talk to any motherless daughter to make sure that we ask that. So thank you for sharing that.
At our
Okay,
last,
so I got
at our last retreat in January in Northern California, we had T-shirts made up for all the women that said, "Ask me about my mom," and it was a free giveaway.
love it.
And so they can go out in the world and someone can say, "Okay, I'm asking you about your mom," and they can choose what they want to tell. They can
Yeah.
talk about her life, they can talk about her death, they can talk about anything at all that they want, but it feels good to talk about our moms. It felt
Hmm.
bad to not talk about her for a long time. So we're giving them permission to go out in the world in those t-shirts and talk about their mom, even with strangers.
I love that. And I want to hear about more about the retreats and how everybody can find you in just a minute. So here are the questions. I've got 5 questions.
Okay.
My mother died when I was 7. I'm now 42 and raising 2 small kids. I carry a lot of anxiety thinking I have an end date. We talked about this. Sometimes my grief makes it hard to be present. How can I be a better mom?
Well, I think you are a self-aware mom, which in my book is a good mom. I'm not sure exactly what she means by better, but I'm gonna guess it means that she wants to be more present for her children and not in the mind of what happened in the past and therefore what could happen in the future.
That sounds
That's a
better.
very intentional process, to notice when we're dwelling in the past, notice when we're projecting into the future, and just bring it in and be present and say, "Oh, I'm doing that again. I notice that I'm thinking about my mom when I was young. I notice that I'm worried about what might happen to me at that age. I need to just remember to be right here with them now because that time is so fleeting. I have 2 daughters now, they're 28 and 24, and it really was yesterday that they were 11 and 7.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. That's good. That's good advice. Here's another. I'm a motherless daughter, but my mother is still alive. She
Hmm.
left when I was a little girl. No one talks about that grief. Am I even a motherless daughter? I don't know where to put that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of talk right now, chatter on the internet about the phrase motherless daughters. And some women saying, "I'm not motherless, I had a mother." It's almost always women who lost mothers in adulthood. This phrase
Mm,
was never meant to apply to someone who lost their mom in their 50s or 60s. It really was meant for women who were younger and didn't have their mom throughout their childhood. So, yes, if she was 7, did she say 7 years old?
she didn't say. She just said she was a little girl.
It was the other that was 7.
Yeah.
So she
Yeah.
was young and her mother left. If she never saw her mother again and no one ever talked to her, and she moved through childhood, adolescence, into and through adulthood without a living mother as a presence in her life, I believe that's a motherless daughter. Now, we do our retreats just for women who lost mothers to death because there's one significant difference. Your history of growing up without your mom might be the same, but often if she's still alive and out there somewhere, there is always in your mind and the mind of your family, if not the probability, then the possibility that there could be a reunion. And I did
Mm,
interview some women for Motherless Daughters whose mothers had abandoned the family or the children. And then when I wrote the AfterGrief, I went back and re-interviewed a number of the women from the first book, and some of them
hmm.
had reunited with their mothers later. So they no
Interesting.
longer considered themselves motherless daughters because they had reconnected. Some hadn't, some had.
Yeah. I think it feels like this question is sort of encoded with like, do I have a right to grieve in a way? And I think that the
Oh, the
grief is
answer to
still,
that is
yeah,
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. To have not had your mom there
yeah.
for guidance or nurturance or protection. There's a wonderful book and program called Mother Hunger that is
Mm,
very much for women in that category. And I typically guide them in that direction for resources and for groups because that's for women who lost mothers to death or abandonment or mental illness, or, whose mothers were not there to be present and attuned for them during their childhoods, and who feel that lack now as adults.
Right, right. Well, that's great. Great to know. And I'll link everything mentioned today. I will be linking to for sure. Okay, another question. It's been 5 years and I still cry all the time. My husband is frustrated. Is something wrong with me?
Oh, I can't answer that question. That sounds like a diagnosis from afar with very limited information. What I can say is that if you were close with your mom and you still miss her 5 years later, that is a very natural expression of the love that you still feel. However, if you truly are crying all the time and it is getting in the way of your relationships, your productivity, your functionality, your parenting, then that's an indication that professional help might be a good idea to check into after 5 years. But I don't like putting time limits on things, because
Professional help's always good, right?
maybe this woman, I'm just going to say, maybe this woman, we don't know, had to spend the first 2 or 3 years after her mom died doing all of the administrative work, the estate,
Right.
selling a house, taking care of an elderly father. I mean, that may have gotten in the way of her grief. So she may, in grief terms, only be in year 2 if she just couldn't access those feelings in the first 3 years because there was no place or time to do that. So we don't know enough really to say.
Yeah, that's a great point. The final question is, how do I support my best friend through her first Mother's Day without her mom? I don't want to say the wrong thing.
It's hard to say the wrong thing. Saying nothing is doing the wrong thing. No, if you feel, I mean, because she knows it's the first Mother's Day without her mom. Sometimes people say, oh, I don't want to remind them. I don't want to make them feel bad. They're thinking about it anyway, of course. She's thinking this is the first Mother's Day without my mom. So sometimes just a text or a call that says, hey, I'm thinking of you. I know this is your first Mother's Day without your mom. And maybe you're having some feelings around it. I just want you to know I love you and I'm here if you want to talk. If you are a person who can hold space for another person's grief, you can also just say, hey, let's tell some stories about your mom. Tell me some stories about her. Let her again be a presence on that day. It's hard, like I said, it's hard to say the wrong thing if what you're saying is from a genuine place of, wanting to give your friend support and connection. But saying nothing can, I wouldn't call it wrong, but it can be hurtful or not helpful if you're really close and you're not acknowledging that this day is probably going to be a tough one for her.
Yeah, I love that. So tell me and everyone, so you have the support groups, the phone calls, you have the retreats. Can you, how do we get to work with you?
If you lost your mother up until the age of 25, you can come to a retreat in Connecticut in June. There's still a couple of spots left. It's a 4-day retreat, June 5th to 8th. You can go to motherlessdaughters.com to read about it. We'll have another one later in the year in December, and also I'm going to be at Omega Institute in upstate New York doing a Motherless Daughters workshop in October. So that's all in real life. Virtually, you can come to the free Mother's Day call on May 9th if there's still time. You can also join a Tuesday or Thursday online virtual support group that has a community, will very soon have a community attached to it where you can communicate with other women 24/7. Online, you can find other women who were the same age you were, who lost moms to the same cause, who live in your hometown if you want to, meet people in person. All of those will be options. And again, those are called the Motherless Daughters circles, and you can just go to motherlessdaughters.com and look them up.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I mean, it is not a club that I wish to be a part of, but the fact that those of us who are have all of the work you've done and continue to do. I mean, it just gets better and better with all the retreats and the phone calls. And just thank you so much. And thank you for saying yes to this interview. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Jackie.